So those of you who've been attending the sessions at Zohari Hall today have seen Michelle here, and now it's her turn to be on stage with Mrinalini. Mrinalini Harishchandrai, sorry, Mrinalini Harishchandrai and Michelle Bambawale. Bambawale. Gosh, I've not done my homework well. But I'm delighted to introduce them before I let them get into conversation about their books. I was lucky to be in conversation with Michelle about her book, Becoming Goan. Michelle, can you hold it up, please? This is a coming home story, a contemporary coming home story. It's about Michelle moving to Goa and her experiences through that, and I don't want to give it away because she's going to talk more about it. Michelle will be in conversation and with Mrinalini, whose book is a fiction. It's a novel set in Goa. It's called Rescuing a River Breeze. And Mrinalini's book has been shortlisted for the McKettrick Prize. McKettrick. Sorry? Long-listed for the McKettrick Prize. And Mrinalini is a poet. Those of you who read poetry may have seen some of her poems in Poetry at Sangam, especially that's where I remember her from. And she's published in many journals. She's also a short story, short fiction writer, short stories. Her short stories have been long-listed, shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize. And this is her first work of, first novel. Michelle is also a versatile person. She's been a writer for a very long time. She's contributed to newspapers in the past. She's been an active blogger. She's also a photographer, but mainly she's worked in education as a professional educator for many years. And now she is also interested in environment and and taking part in a lot of the things that are happening in Goa's cultural and environmental circuit. I leave it to both of you to talk about your books. We have about 45 minutes, 55 minutes? 45 minutes. So we'll leave 10 minutes for question and answer, yeah?
Thank you very much, Vinuta, for the introduction. Thank you, Mrinalini. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We will be both discussing our books. Mine is non-fiction. It's a memoir. And Mrinalini's is fiction. Both are set in Goa. Hers is, I won't say, you say about your book. Okay, so I have Goan ancestry. I inherited a house in Seoli. I had never lived in Goa. I used to come here for summer holidays. I was born and brought up in Pune, after which I moved to Mumbai to study and work. Then I've lived in different places around the world, Dubai, Bangkok, London. While I was there, I always thought of coming to live in Goa. My husband and I, when we got married, we thought we'll buy a house near the beach. That was everyone's dream. This was in about 1990. It cost 1,85,000. We had 10,000. We didn't have the rest of it. So we lost the money. And we lost the flat, and then we'd never had money after that. And then as the years went by, we continued to have this dream of living in Goa, but that whole Kalangut, Kandoli, Baga had become, I don't know, linking road or whatever you want to call it. So we were living by then in Bangkok, and my father was, I have this house in the village in Seoli, and people were like, Seoli, who's ever going to live in Seoli? And anyway, we extended the house while we were living in London and Bangkok. It's a complicated thing. I think everyone who has any experience with inheriting property in Goa in terms of dealing with Portuguese property law, etc. So I went through all of that. And then during the pandemic, I moved here with my 2 adult children and my dogs. And I was living in Seoli. And so the book was, I was blogging in the pandemic because it was a very different life that we were leading. Even when I lived in Bombay, there were Zoom parties and sourdough crisis and toilet paper crisis, and I was recording this. So when I moved to Goa, I continued to blog, and many, many people from urban India had also moved to Goa at the time. And I was, people were like, Michelle, how is it living in a village? Everyone has moved to Goa. What is this whole, are you an insider, an outsider? So I started blogging, and I had a blog called Being Goan, which is tongue-in-cheek. It appears in a chapter in my book called What's So Special About Goans Anyway. I'll read some of it a little later. Then this idea of writing a book, many people suggested. I was like, I can blog, I can't write a book. It's very complicated, as we know. You have to have a narrative arc, you have to have protagonist setting. But the idea sort of took root, and many people said, you're here in Provence, why don't you write it? So that's the inspiration for my writing the book, and whatever I learned living in Seoli, in a village, was very different to the stereotypes that you see about Goa and Goans, which are, just beach party, eat, drink. The life was very different to that, and I felt I needed to record it. So that's the reason for my book and for my writing the book.
It needs a bit, yeah.
And it's a very enlightening book, and interesting for anyone, not just Goan or someone moving to Goa. And on the other end of the spectrum, somehow, the title of this session is Writing is Belonging, and the most important part of this is the question mark, which is what we're here to address today. Now, I don't think I ever tried to categorize myself as Goan or non-Goan or anything. So I think it would be interesting to give you a little history of why this book was written. The novel Rescuing a River Breeze, it's, well, what it's about, it's a novel, it's set in Panjim, which was the prime city and jewel of, colonial Portugal in Goa. And it's has a teenage protagonist. She dreams of adventure. Her name is Shirley Karachim. She dreams of adventure from the books her father has introduced her to. Her normal life consists of going to school, going to the seaside, visiting her father's mines, and she spends time with her Portuguese neighbors. Slowly, somehow, as time passes, so the novel is set the last 2 months of Portuguese rule, which is around October, November, December, And the threads in her world start unraveling when her father is arrested out of the blue. And so this is Goa's beyond the usual surf and EDM and casino culture that it's identified with today. And why did I write this book? Going back in history, my family, my great-grandfather moved from Sindh, where he originally lived, to do some business here. And at that time, trade was open with the Portuguese. And 1919 was also the time when the British were in India. However, 1947, because of partition, he was required to move out of his home, and business was flourishing here, so he moved to Goa in 1947 full-time. And, there was a shop in Panjim, and he sort of integrated with the local culture. Generations after him did too, spoke Portuguese, spoke Konkani, spoke their home language, spoke Sindhi, and also knew English, and randomly knew Latin and Marathi also. So it was quite a mix in the family. And so my summers were spent, as far as I remember, in the 80s. I was just sent to my nanny's house, and that was it. So even though I don't have a Goan name and I don't look Goan, it's a rather large part of my psyche, and I don't even question it, and it would be odd for me if anyone questioned it too. But anyway, so the story, this story has been inspired by my mom's stories to me. She would narrate them to me growing up. And there was a couple that really stood out for me. So one was when she lived before 61, and there was a flag right outside her window. It was the Portuguese flag, and every day the flag would go up in the morning, and then it would go up to the sound of bugles. There were 4 buglers for one flag, and they would do this whole sort of ceremony with the folding and the unfolding. So the flag would go up in the morning, and then it would sort of descend in the evening. And she would watch this, as a young girl from her window every day. And it was a time where there was no television, radio was just coming about, and this was entertainment, and that was interesting. And then the other one was she had a friend who was of Portuguese origin, who was a neighbor, and every evening, right after school, they would meet. They were best friends, and best friends. They would tell each other all their stories. They would grumble to each other. They would talk about boys. They would sort of do everything together. And then one day in 61, my mum came home, and she saw that this was the day of the war, the one-day war, and she had a plan to meet her friend. And the friend just wasn't home, and she was upset because something was off with the entire, her day if she didn't meet her friend. And so then she came home, and then everyone was worried because there's a war on outside suddenly. And she went out to look out the window, and instead of the Portuguese flag going up, there's a white flag going up. Now that was reality, and I thought that was interesting, because usually you hear, okay, the colonial rule is over, and that's the dominant narrative. But there was this one story of this young girl looking out the window, and she's just very upset that she can't meet her friend ever again. In fact, they never reconnected. Even today, when I talk to her about it, she gets a little emotional about the loss. It was a sense of loss. So this book is just addressing the sort of identity that comes with friendship also, that we do have and we do harbor with the different identities around us.
I think, Mrinalini, the way you spend Karachi and why they were called Karachi is very interesting, and you should talk a bit about it. How you spell, they were called Karachi because they come from Sindh, but how she spelt it in the book is a very Konkani kind of spelling. It's true. It was a little detail, and it's one way that they would sort of feel integrated. The Portuguese would somehow just give names. So the reality of this, getting to it, the reality of this was that the family was sort of nicknamed by the Portuguese during their time as coming from Delhi. And for them, Delhi, no one was from Delhi. Okay, it was from Karachi. But they were called Pequen Delhi, which is Little Delhi. And even though Delhi was the way that they would refer to India, the Portuguese and the administration. So the name sort of just stuck. There was a Grand Delhi and there was a Pequen Delhi, and my great-grandfather was the younger brother, so he was called Pequen Delhi, which is Little Delhi in Portuguese. So I thought that was interesting, the name nomenclature. And I also noticed in research that there are names like that where they take the K sound, and it's sort of given like an X. For instance, a Kamoti can become a Zamoti. So that was just like a little bit of a creative choice and this is what you can do in fiction. Thanks for noticing that. True, it was very cool because I saw this spelling and I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. And I thought, oh, it's such a cool name. And then she explains later that he was called Karachi, that, you just give people names based on where you came from. I was looking, at the characters in your book, and of course Shirley, who's the main protagonist, and her whole coming of age, and lots of similarities in, when you're young, you want to be in the school musical, you learn music. That's a very important narrative through the book of this musical that the girls are preparing for in school. Also the whole thing about learning the piano, which is, I think, very important in sort of go Goan culture. Girls, you know, they learn the piano and to sing. I think that you bring out very well in the fiction, and it's the narrative that goes through, because Shirley doesn't think she can sing, but the lady who she goes every evening for, you know, piano practice and singing practice, and I have also been through that. I didn't learn, but I mean, I think it was part of Goan culture where you had to learn all these things. Again, stitching as well. I think you talk about, you know, the stitching. Something else, the cats. The cats were important characters in your story. Any sort of background to that, or the characters you talk about?
Well, these are all the elements that so many, if anyone's writing about Goa, these elements would show up. They do show up in yours as well. What I found interesting is also that both of us have rivers. My book has the river Mandovi, and yours talks about the Shapora. And what's interesting is also taking all of these elements, there is a certain rite of passage where you are becoming Goan and you're learning what it means to be Goan, whereas the protagonist of this book has, you know, she's growing into adulthood. She's learning how to like understand where the boundaries are between, you know, herself and the other as well. And we have the red earth, we have the fenny, we have the cats. It's all there, you know.
True, there's a lot. So I have a whole chapter which talks about Feni, and she has a character in her book who's the cook or the caregiver for the family, and she solves all ailments of the family with Feni, whether they have a stomach ache, whether they have a headache, whether they have fever. And her family, who she cares for, is a bit skeptical about the values of Feni because of the smell. But I think that, you know, you've managed to fictionalize another important sort of part of Goan identity, which is the importance of Feni.
Yes, and definitely you also kind of offer the history of Feni in your book. So that's something that we cannot put into the fiction because it's just already, you know, part of the lives of the characters. And, you know, there's so many similarities in our book. And one of the main similarities we have is this question of identity. And Michelle, you have explained the various, you've really broken it down really well. I'm going to let you read out something about identity that you discovered.
Okay, I have a chapter on that's called What's So Special About Goans Anyway. I'll read some of it. I have spent extended amounts of time over the last 20 years in Seoli before moving here full-time. Over this period, I have made some anecdotal observations and have manufactured my own criteria for being Goan. I need to emphasize that these are all tongue-in-cheek observations. While there's much research on Goans, our history, migration, and diaspora, I rely on none of them. Also here I'm talking about Goans in their true salt of the earth, children of the soil avatar, living in the villages, not the global diaspora who may identify as Goans in spirit but may have never lived here, or the more sophisticated Goans living in cities. I fulfill some of these criteria, but I aspire to all. You speak Konkani. Show of hands here. Yes, most. You notice car number plates and are suspicious of every car that does not have a GA, a Goa registration. Yes? You have at least 2 dogs and or 2 cats. You may also have some pigs, hens, goats, and cows. Yes? You eat fish at least 5 days a week, if not 7. And you know what is seasonal, how it has to be cooked, fried, or curried. You know what fish is available in the market that day, how much it costs, and how fresh it is just by looking at the gills. You know how all the religious, you know when all the religious festivals take place and how they are to be celebrated, the prayers, the customs, and what to cook. There are few every month, all celebrated with great pomp and pageantry, food, music, and flowers. You can recognize not just the fruit, but also the leaves of the mango trees in your neighborhood. You know not only your own trees, but also your neighbor's trees. Who has the best Mankurad, Mangilar, Maldes, Bishop or Fernandino? You track the flowers every year. You covet your neighbor's Mankurad tree, even breaking a commandment. You know which mangoes are to be just cut and eaten, which ones need to be made into the popular korum, miskut or mangad. This also extends to other tropical fruit or berry trees, jackfruit, jamun, bindli and karwanda. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of all local flora and fauna, and you can identify birds and their sounds. You know exactly when the Urak Feni supply starts each year, and you have the best source. You drive for hours to get it, but it's worth it. You brag about your source, but you don't share the contact as it's a closely guarded secret. You insist that only yours is genuine, the real stuff. You sing with great gusto in the shower, in church, at all celebrations, in a choir or in a band. You play at least one musical instrument, usually a piano, guitar, violin or drums, and you love music. You have a love-hate relationship with your neighbors and your family. You're either not talking to them or you know too much about them, or both. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer is the mantra you follow. Everyone is nodding here. You know how to make, or who in the village makes the best coconut oil, sausages, vinegar, bibinka, shakuti or samarache masala. You know which gado has the best street fruit, cutlet pav, choris pav, roast omelette, and patal bhaji breakfast in your village or in the state. You have no interest in any other food or cuisine and look dismissively as new restaurants and cuisines debut in Goa each year. You have a good appetite for and a very strong opinions on local politics that you're always willing to share. You get your news only from the local papers, usually O Heraldo, and news channels, often prudent media. You attend more funeral than wedding masses and you wear black for funerals. Lorna belting out Bibdo is your favorite anthem. In fact, you love anything Lorna sings. You religiously follow and play football and support Brazil in the World Cup. You have a healthy distaste for all outsiders, and as outsider is a generic term used in Goa that covers anyone who's non-Goan by ancestry. It does not discriminate based on your socio-economic status, how long you've lived here, if you speak Konkani, have the required legal government identification and documentation, or own property. It's somehow beyond that. I have made a start to claiming my local Nis Goenkar status. I now complain as well as the next Goan about the rapid overdevelopment, pollution, politics and corruption at every level across the state, and of course about outsiders.
That was very entertaining, but more interestingly, that's actually quite accurate. And you know, Michelle's just managed to put so many of these facts together, and these facts have sort of become like urban lore and legend that are related to the land. And in that spirit, I thought I'd read you know, a certain urban legend that is for folks in the know. So this is when the protagonist is a young girl and she imagines that she's having a conversation with a statue. And the talking statue is someone that is known to all of us and quite dear to us and is a fixture in Panjim, is Abe Faria. Yeah. So she's sort of just going through a really rough time right now, and she's hurt herself, and as a 5-year-old this is a memory. And she's having, you know, some sort of like an exchange with him. You know, when I was young, this was many years ago, before I became a hypnotist. Hypnost, said Shirley in her 5-year-old voice. Yes, hypnotist, Jose continued. Anyway, before I became one, I was training to be a priest. My father was a very good priest, and so I was training to be like him. We were invited by the Queen of Portugal, and she told me to give a holy speech in her chapel. Shirley was riveted and impressed that Jose had met a queen in a faraway land. It was my first show and the first time I had to perform. I was so nervous, really I was shaking and scared. But my father told me something that made all my fear go away. He said, Jose paused dramatically. Do you know what he said? Shirley's eyes widened as she shook her head no. He said, Hisogli baji, katore baji. From the way her eyes narrowed blankly, he realized that Shirley had definitely missed the big message. So Jose had to translate. All the people in front of you, they are vegetables. Cut down the vegetables. Jose's laugh was so deep that Shirley felt it through her shoulder where his palm was resting, which made it contagious. The thought of all the people with vegetable heads made Shirley laugh too. As Shirley sat chuckling on the cannon, Jose added, I also laugh like this. And then abracadabra. I lost my fear and spoke and made my holy speech so well. As Jose added soberly, I understood with my thoughts and my words what it is that I can do. I could change the situation for myself. I was able to stay and not run away. There is great merit in staying and continuing. Then he touched Shirley on the side of her scraped knee. Does it hurt? Shirley tried to bring her thoughts back to her pain, but she didn't feel its waves radiating from her scraped leg. In fact, it felt perfectly normal and peaceful, even though her skin was blood-encrusted and lacerated. She shook her head no. You got more laughs out of yours.
No. I think there's a lot to think about and contemplate there, and there's a deeper sort of meaning that we need to reflect on. And I think this motif of Abe Faria and the statue, it sort of is character all through your book, and her relationship with the statue and her fascination with the statue and, you know, his teachings and things like that. And again, this whole migration story, I think, is sort of manifested through that, because he left and went, and she's always thinking about, you know, what if I left and what about the world? So maybe something about the migration, like you spoke about. I mean, like India and Goa is multicultural, multilinguist, and like your family spoke so many languages. How did they manage to continue with their Sindhi, their Konkani, their Portuguese, you know, in this multilingual Goa?
So, well, that's the similarity with our experiences in our books as well, is the idea of migration. And Michelle, your family too has migrated and come back. And speaking about my family, to answer your question, is that you just do it. You know, you're here, you integrate, but you sort of like have the remnants of your old culture. Now, if you leave Goa, it's not like you've left your Goan culture behind. So that's what happens to us. And as human beings, that's the beauty. You know, we ourselves are kind of like rivers. We can flow and we can be malleable, sort of elastic, and we do adjust the course as required. We do have it all in us. And this is another point to bring up, you know. So there's land, and it's finite, and you know, Goa is got like its borders, which are, you know, from here to here. However, as human beings, we don't have these sort of borders within us, beyond the physical. And sometimes you can ask, there's another way to look at it. Perhaps, you know, the land doesn't always necessarily belong to you, but maybe you belong to the land, and then that just opens up a different perspective of belonging. Because as human beings, what are the various lands that sit within us? And if you belong to the land, that's more expansive. And then that's a different sort of way to look at your own identity. And you could belong to this land, and you could belong to that land. And, you know, it's a little more sort of like inclusive.
I think it is this land and the stories that have brought us together. Otherwise, maybe our paths wouldn't have crossed. It has so much of, a sense of belonging that it is inspirational for you to want to write about. There's one thing I found in your book which had this sort of longing for the land that was left in Karachi, and then, Shirley's mother always had this thing about wanting to go back to her mother and her grandmother, and so somehow there is some connection to a land, whether you leave it or you come back. Maybe if you could talk something about that after partition and living here and leaving the family in Karachi, but they couldn't go back.
So that's interesting that you bring that up, because it's true, there was no way to go back. And even though anyone who came from Sindh harbored any desire, notion, wish to go back, eventually couldn't go back, and now it's just sort of impossible. So people find ways, you just, you become the river, you adapt, and you hold on to the fragments. The irony is that today I don't even, so Sindhi curry has been ruined for me. I don't, if it's served along with the Goan curry, I choose the Goan curry first. That's what that's my memory of it, and for me that's what I grew up with. So somehow through the generations you leave that behind also. True. And that's what's happened in your book. You do have a longing for the land that you left behind. Your parents probably had that longing, your grandparents, and then somehow you make it back, and in a different avatar, a more composite avatar perhaps.
True. Talking about food, I think there's, in your book you describe these very lavish, dinner parties and dance parties that you can imagine happened in Panjim in the 60s. Elaborate tables were laid out, people were dressed up, and they had music and dancing, and there was waltzing, and I think that's another sort of part of Goan culture that we all can identify with and relate to. And your book is set sort of in the late 50s, early 60s. My sort of coming to Goa was in the 70s and 80s. But I could see Panjim exactly, the picture she paints about Panjim, Miramar, Aguad, and, the Mandovi that the book is along. And I was thinking how far we've come in terms of the whole stereotype that I keep coming back to of what is Goa, and how everyone who comes here, you just come for the party, drink, beach kind of, that's just Goa that people think of. And for me, one of the motivations for writing the book was there is so much more to Goan culture, there's so much more to Goan history beyond this sort of party stereotype. And in your book, it's not mentioned at all. It's this very, genteel, sort of beautiful, cultured kind of society. And so how much was research and how much was from your mother's storytelling?
So quite a bit was from memories from my grandmother. She was alive when I had started writing this book. And in fact, there's a beautiful photo of her, sitting in the Cabo. She's the only lady in her sari. She's got like a pink flower in her hair, and she's sipping her tea. It's a tea party. And she's, you can already, photographic evidence was available, stories were available, and the nostalgia brought it all, back. And you're right, like there is this whole other new culture that's developed from the post-1961 that's still developing. And I think what both of Michelle and I are trying to do is just trying to kind of hold on to a past that we both have a certain experience of, or have a certain nostalgia from, that is an inherited nostalgia, as long as our own, to bottle that sort of fragrance, to bottle that and preserve that time. And that's what these books are, that perhaps they are not just for the others, but probably for us, to try to bottle it for ourselves and hold on to it.
True. I think it is, for me, I saw Seoli change so dramatically. In terms of the mass construction, in terms of, you know, I just think that the sort of infrastructure was not able to keep up with what was happening because we don't have a sewage system. The garbage collection is very, you know, ad hoc. We don't have water. Water is a real problem. And the construction has just kept coming. And I think in the 3 years of my living here, it has gone far away from this romantic place that I came in the summer holidays in the 70s and 80s, where, you know, we drew water from a well, there was no electricity, we had piggy toilets, to now we have some of the nicest restaurants and bars and things like that. And for me, it's sort of trying to reconcile these many different Goas that we all have. And that has been the other story that I have experienced, no matter where you are in the world, and you say Goa, people's eyes light up and they want to tell you their own Goa story, because everybody has a connection to Goa. Everybody feels it's a special place, and I think everybody has their own version of Goa that, you know, you want to live, and we have our own versions. One is fiction, one is non-fiction, but it is a special place, I think, and I think that's what we've tried to sort of bring out through the book. I think some elements remain the same: the sea, the red earth, the coconut trees, the Feni, you know, some things are a part of the identity that, I mean, mangoes comes up again and again in your book, and in my book as well. So I think there's certain things which will remain sort of quintessentially Goan. What do you think?
It's true. There's also, so there are all of these elements which are very tangible. But, you know, coming back to the identity, what I found interesting in your book, Michelle, if you could just like speak a little bit about it, was you also went into, so I feel like both of us are very brave because we're touching on subjects that are touchy for Goans, which is the concept of, you know, defining what is a Goan, and also placing ourselves in a cultural milieu that is sort of, you know, you do have to figure out where you're placed in it. Now, talking about 1961, everyone has their opinion on it based on their identity, which I will get to. But you know, you have the even it's so pervasive that in 1967 there was a referendum. There were two parties. One wanted to, you know, connect Goa to Maharashtra and sort of integrate with Maharashtra, whereas one wanted to, you know, keep it identity. And the so there was a very, by a slim margin, there was like a you know, a vote, and it was voted for Goa to be its own state. And so that is just sort of endemic, and that's where it comes from. And beyond that, there's also been a couple of bills. Would you like to just touch them a little bit and talk about what that means for us as people trying to find an identity?
I have mentioned them in my book. There were two bills in the last 2 years. One was the Goa Revolutionary Party's Person of Goa Origin Bill. The other was the Bhumipitra Adhikari Bill. Both of them came up and were not passed. But I think there is this thing about Goan identity and what is Goan identity. And I think there is the official or the version that is political, and then there's a personal version that I think all of us have. For any more, you'll have to read my book, and we have 10 minutes more for questions. So if anyone has any questions, comments.
So I was just listening to the whole conversation, and the part that I picked up on was also about this who belongs, who has claim over Goa. I'm also a Goan who, last 2 generations of my family has not lived here, come here for holidays, and now I've come to live here. And suddenly, because I've come to live here, I feel like I have a greater claim because of I'm Goan origin. And then, you know, I watch those feelings of hostility, the other number plates, why are people invading my village? And I'm uncomfortable with that, actually, because I'm struggling to say, why do I have a greater claim? And I really liked what Mrinalini said, that whether you belong to the land or the land belongs to you, you can belong to the land. So I would like you all to elaborate a little bit more on this whole, how have you all processed, how two of you have processed this idea of who's Goan and does anyone else have a claim?
I am processing it, and it took me some 277 pages because I have lived in many places as a, migrant, as they say, and my grandparents left Goa because there were no opportunities, so we have lived in other places. But this term I'm struggling with as well, and I think it's only in Goa, and somehow I use it in inverted commas, but I decided to address the elephant in the room because that's how it's said. It's openly said, it's printed in the papers, in books and things like that. And I'm the same as you. I'm sort of trying to figure out, and I have in the beginning the terms that I struggle with are like local, Goan, Portuguese, outsider, migrant. And through the book, I sort of try to deal with these terms because people would say, oh, the locals, and but it's in a very dismissive way. It's like those people who lived here. So I think it's also the context and how you relate to the land, how you feel a connection to the land. I think that's what's most important, this whole idea of belonging. I don't think it matters where your parents or grandparents came from. It's how you relate to the land is my way of dealing with it.
You keep it. Yes.
My question, I'm Mrityunjay. My question to both of you is, you see, in kind of pan-India scenario, a little bit of Goa is touched by everybody. So, in a pan-India scenario, do you think that we have got into Goa so much that Goa requires a little bit of originality to be developed? Or each of us, everybody wants a little bit of originality to come up with, rather than, the oft-quoted Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which we keep on repeating nowadays without being the Udar Charitanantu?
I don't know what you mean by regionality.
Just that feeling you were talking about, that seeing a number plate of somebody, some other estate, people become suspicious, or people are outsider. There's a kind of not any, but then a little bit of apprehension, a sense of apprehension. That is what is the regionality. I mean, that people become, in many things, people want to be left to themselves.
A bit more provincial.
Yeah, a lot more, yeah. Provincial, yeah.
That's what you're looking for?
That's right.
I think it's more to do with people want to hang on to the culture, and I think people come to Goa because it's a special place. And then you come here and you lose whatever the culture was. So the idea is to sort of record what the culture and the emotion is, not to be, like you're saying, provincial. The thing is, like, I have also some photos that I've taken, and I have a picture that's taken in the village of Pambudpa, which had a big banner saying no outsiders save Goa. But the reason for that was there was a huge luxury development coming up which was just cutting the hill. So it's more towards preserving the environment and preserving the culture as opposed to saying, we don't want you type of thing. That has been my experience, but like I said, I've been here 3 years of it, toward the pandemic.
You?
But, sorry, I think Mrinalini should also respond.
So, like this is a political question, and I'm only a writer. However, the way I see it is that most of us do not come here or stay here for particularities like the Alfonso or the Feni or for a coconut tree. We don't stay here for these tangible things. We stay here, we feel some sort of connection because of the way we feel about it. And there's a certain feeling to this land that comes also with certain intangibles. There's a certain sense of independence and freedom, a sense of pride. And these are the feelings that as human beings we try to hold on to. And we find meaning in the tangibles to try to talk about it, but it's not enough. It's the intangible feeling that this place gives us. Now, how do you fragment that into regions? I don't have the answer to that. The other thing is, Michelle and I have come to this place of having written a book. Why has that happened? It's because there is a certain seepage of the place in us, a certain seepage of all these intangible feelings within us that we're trying to bottle through our words, through, in the covers of a book. And it's maybe that is a way of belonging too. A book can be a way of belonging. A book is as much Feni and Goan, as much Goan as Feni is. How do you make that regional? How do you divide that up? So trying to find the solution of cutting up the land into pieces is never really the solution. Not in this case, the way I see it. But again, this is a very political sort of situation, and everyone has an identity, and everyone has a point of view.
So just an observation. I liked, Michelle, how you introduced a very unique way of humor about what being Goan is. And I like the intimacy which you introduced to Soze. And I found that was very original and made the book more readable and the conversation more interesting. So coincidentally, I was born in 1961 in Mumbai. And this inspired me to write about my time in Bombay. And in terms of my mother is Goan and my father is Jewish. And whenever I'm in Goa, people refuse to be convinced of my Goan origin. Except one guy who I asked for direction in fluent rudimentary Konkani. But unfortunately, it was fluent and rudimentary. The reason why it was rudimentary, I didn't understand the directions that he gave. So it kind of backfired. I think that was also an interesting point. But what captivated me more was your approach to writing, and that I got a sense of originality and innovation from both of you. So thank you for that. It was inspiring.
Thank you. That's a lovely compliment.
Thank you. Yes. 1 second. Who was this? Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I can't wait to read both your books. And I really loved what Mrinalini said about the love for the land, which seeps through your books and your writing. So I think that's why you all both wrote the books. But my question is a little different from Goa, because I'm an immigrant as well. I've born and raised in Goa, but I live in the US now. So what's been both your experience in terms of the immigrant experience, staying outside, and how has that impacted the books that you wrote?
For me, I had always lived as an expat in different countries, and I knew that I was not going to live there long term. So I think my experience was you quickly immerse in the culture. You're like always the outsider. You're never going to live there and sort of be part of that community. You're going to live there for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So my experience was, you come in, you look at, you understand the culture, and I think that's what I did coming to Goa as well, because many people say you did so many things in such a short time, because I have a chapter at the end of things to do in Goa which are beyond the beach stereotype. There's so much of culture, history, art festivals which people don't really know about. I didn't know about. So I think for me it was, again, I'm like, which Goa do I belong in, because there are so many different Goas that exist. And I think it's about building community. Wherever you feel a sense of community, you can be a part of, you can feel a part of it. So I think I'm still figuring it out.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So I think personally, I never had an issue. I never thought about it. I think what really helped me is another identity I have as a writer. And a writer tends to be a little bit on the fringe. And I'm anyway used to being on the fringe, even in Bombay or even in the Sindhi community. You know, I think that I started to own it once I realized that, look, I'm just not going to fit in. And coming to this story was very similar. However, I do feel like the story was there. It was asking to be written. I just chased, you know, the facts from the history books, from the stories, from the photographs. What I do wish is I could have gone into the past to really know the details, because I like to know, you know, what was the texture and what was the smell. And, you know, I would have loved that. So in a sense, I'm also an outsider with time. But I think being outsiders really helps you to be a little more objective, to sort of try to look at it from a journalist perspective. And maybe I feel like maybe it served us, you know, because we're here.
If anybody has more questions, yes?
Hi, I'm Paula. I enjoyed both your stories, having lived in Goa and pantomime for about 50 years now. I'm quite interested and also apprehensive and sad about the change that has taken place, like especially in Goa. And she's given a wonderful story of the relationship of the, you know, in the story with Abad Faria. So I think, you know, today what's happening is in Goa, why we resent the so-called outsiders or whatever, is because of the lack of respect for our Goan culture, for the Goan way of life, and for everything that's Goan. And especially in case of Abad Faria, I'll just relate an incident. Earlier, I think everyone respected, or you just went by passing the statue of Abad Faria. You heard his stories, you heard about his history and the contribution of his past to Goa. Recently, there was in the papers, the people from outside Goa who come, they're washing their clothes and drying them at the foot of the statue. The other day, I saw some guy, he actually took his taxi or his car up near the statue, and he's circling around and trying to park his car there. I mean, where does that, I mean, that's something that upsets us a lot, not only with a statue, but with the institution and the people and the way of our culture around. So I wonder what Abad Faria thinks of it today when he sees all these guys coming and washing their clothes and, you know, hanging their clothes out there at the foot of the statue and parking their cars there.
I think he'd be as horrified as you.
I think I will go and ask him about this. Thank you.
Please have a conversation with him too. Everyone can have a conversation with Abad Faria.
Thank you so much. I think we should close this session now. And that was a lovely conversation. I'm so happy to see how you took off from each other's work and talked about it. Really nice. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And I hope you stay on for the next session. But yes.
Thank you, Vinuta, and thank you, Michelle.